Introduction, and thank you for bringing me in. I'm honored to work with you and your students, and really honored to meet all you out there tonight. Um, so I want to start actually by talking a little bit about my experience in the field, and then I want to share a video with you about the topics of mental health and suicide prevention that was created by one of your neighbor high schools, actually Pleasant Valley High School. So a little bit of my background: I've worked in suicide prevention for about 20 years now, and you're going to hear the story about what set me down that path. But over that time, I spent a lot of time working in school-based suicide prevention. I'm part of the Department of Education Student Mental Health Policy Work Group. And in case you're not aware, there's actually a state mandate where all schools in California are required to do suicide prevention policies, which is where I actually met your staff and your team about a year ago. But through that, I helped to write the policy, and I share all of this not because I think you care about my bio. I share it with you just to hopefully build some trust that you know what I have, what I'm talking about. And with that, we're going to jump in. So I want to share with you this video. Brandon, since you're on video, if you could just give me a thumbs up once the video starts that you can hear it and see it and everything. Video is just real short, 60 seconds, and then we're going to switch gears and get into the presentation. So with that, hold on just one second. Oh, actually, Brandon, it looks like it's keeping me from sharing my screen. If you could tweak that really quick. You might have to make me a co-host. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. Got it now.
Hello, my name is Marco Lopez, and I am a normal everyday high schooler. Except I've been struggling with suicidal thoughts. It's hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting alone. Be farther from the truth. If you look close enough, many of us are going through the same battle. So whenever you're feeling alone, don't forget that many of us are soldiers fighting the same war, and we've got your back.
Many teenagers are having thoughts of suicide. If you see the warning signs, such as changes in sleep, isolating oneself, or feelings of hopelessness, don't be afraid to seek help. Or, if you see these signs in a friend, help them. One day, we can end this war, together. If you or a loved one is feeling suicidal, call the National Suicide Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255.
So again, that was a film created by students over at Pleasant Valley High School there. And we're hoping to bring this program, or we plan to bring this program to Chico High next year. Basically, the program is about engaging youth around the topics of mental health and suicide prevention, but we do it through the creation of film. There's something in education known as Bloom's taxonomy, and up at the top of that, we know that we retain the most information when we create something. So we give youth the opportunity to learn about the topics and create those films. We have a number of films, and I'll share the website if you're interested to go out and check it out after we're done tonight. But before we really get into what I would consider the training portion, I was asked to share a story with you about why I do this work. One of the most common questions I get out there is, why would someone choose to work in a space that talks about suicide and suicide prevention on a day-to-day basis? And the reason why is I live in San Diego. I grew up there, and growing up, I had a good friend of mine named Jesse. And I had met Jesse because my older brother and his older brother were best friends. So whenever our older brother, since they could drive, would go to the movies or go down to the beach or go, pretty much go anywhere, me and Jesse have what I refer to as an arranged friendship, where our moms would throw us in the back of the car and kind of force us just to be around each other. Now, Jesse was a year older than me. So if you think back to your years in high school and looking up to the upperclassmen, you thought they had the whole world figured out. And that's who Jesse was to me. And I was really blessed my freshman year because me and Jesse ended up in the same fourth period geometry class. So every day my freshman year, I knew that there was one period of the day where I could feel safe, Me and Jesse had our desks right next to each other. We would hang out, learn a little bit, go to lunch, a couple more classes, and the day was over. Now, me and Jesse also were very different people. I was, pretty scrawny kid, kind of a self-proclaimed nerd in advanced classes with juniors and seniors. And Jesse was kind of a tough guy, ran with a rougher crowd, but me and him bonded. And anyways, I was coming home from practice one night, and I was walking down the hallway of my house. And my older brother came towards me, and as he got closer, I realized that he had tears in his eyes. And me and my brother are on very different ends of the emotional spectrum. I still cry when I read Hallmark cards or watch Disney movies, and my brother's, a cop that kind of suppresses his emotion. We're very different in that way. And so when I saw him with tears in his eyes, even as a 14-year-old boy, I knew that something bad had happened. And so I went up to him and I asked him what was going on. And even at that moment, I knew that whatever he was about to tell me was going to change my life. And my brother went on to tell me that my friend Jesse had died by suicide that afternoon. And I remember getting that news and the weight of the world hitting me. And I remember stepping back until I hit the wall and sliding down and putting my head between my knees and honestly just crying for hours. And I was overwhelmed with so many emotions. And for those of you who have lost somebody to suicide, it's anger and guilt and shame and just questioning everything. And I eventually made my way to sleep, and I woke up the next morning. I was walking out the house to head to school, and my mother's in law enforcement. And so normally she was already at work by the time I was leaving for school, but for some reason she was in the kitchen cooking breakfast, and she looked at me and she said, "Hey, honey, you don't have to go to school today. One of your best friends just died. I took the day off. Why don't we have breakfast? Let's talk. Let's process." And for whatever reason, I was determined that I was going to make it to school that day. And I didn't really know why until I walked into my fourth period geometry class, because as I was walking up the ramp to the trailer, I remember reaching for the handle, and there was a huge part of me that thought that when I opened up that door, that maybe Jesse's going to be sitting there, and maybe this is all going to be a bad dream that I'm going to wake up from. And unfortunately, that wasn't it. That this was real. This was happening. Jesse had died. And unfortunately, that day and every day for the rest of the school year, I sat next to my best friend's empty desk and wondered what I could have done or what I could have said. What if I could have created space for more important conversations? Now, unfortunately, this was at a time, this was back in the mid-90s, that was the dark ages as far as suicide prevention or mental health in a school setting is concerned. And so we didn't nearly have the robust response or crisis response that schools put in place now. And so at the time, I was really left to deal with this in silence. And a few years later, again, my family was in law enforcement and my dad was a cop too. And he asked me to come check out a presentation from the Yellow Ribbon Suicide Prevention Program. And he asked me to come and just give the police department a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Should the police department endorse the program? As a teenager who'd lost a friend who was in peer counseling, is this a good program? And honestly, I was so excited about the title of the program because for the first time in my life, I heard the word prevention attached to the word suicide. And I walked away from that training, that presentation, feeling so empowered, thinking, man, why aren't we talking about this? Of all the things that parents and adults talk to me about, the reasons and ways that people can die, that teenagers die, why didn't anybody ever talk to me about the one way that my friend died? So the next day I went back to my principal and I handed him a packet of information. And I can say this to you, that your students and children would laugh at me, but there was an 8-minute video on a VHS tape that I needed to him. And I said, we got to do this program. And he kind of brushed me aside and said, we'll come back in a few days and we'll talk about it. So I came back a few days later and I asked him and I said, have you had a chance to look at it? Can we do the program? He said, I got really busy. Come back in a few more days. So I came back a few days later and got the same response and kept coming back till finally one day I walked in his office and he said, look, you're not going to give this up. If this is something you think that we should do, you're a good kid, raise the money and we'll make it happen. So I worked with the local Yellow Ribbon chapter, and the program had been founded a few years previously by a family who had lost their son to suicide. And so we flew them out, and at the time we did things differently. Now we like to talk about these topics in smaller group settings with youth, but at the time we had gathered all 3,000 students at my school, and we gathered them into the gym, and Dale and Daremi were about to present. And right before they were about to speak, they looked at me and they said, hey, Stan, have you thought about what you're going to say? And here I was, a 17-year-old kid, a senior in high school, where one of the only things you're concerned about as a senior in high school is what other people think about you. And I'm being asked to stand in front of my entire school and talk about suicide and suicide prevention. And I was mortified, and I froze, and I was thinking about what I was going to say. And I remembered that I had written a poem in memory of my friend Jesse. Now, the poem had a different ending where the friend saw the warning signs and reached out and connected that friend to help. And the title of it was called "I'm Still Here Because You Were There." But I reached into my backpack, I pull out this crumpled piece of paper, and so here I am in front of my entire student body, all these kids that I've known since I was a child, and I'm reading poetry. And I am just freaking out, thinking, how stupid and naive could you have ever been to think that you could make a difference? And I stumbled through the presentation, read the poem. I skipped practice that day. I went home, I pulled the sheets over my head, and I wanted to pretend like the whole day had never existed again, just thinking how naive could I have ever been to think as a 17-year-old boy that I could ever make a difference. Now, the next day I was walking onto campus, and the way my high school was set up is the attendance office had a window that looked out to the front of campus. So the attendance lady could kind of monitor everybody as they were coming and going from school. And as I walked onto campus, I remember making eye contact with her. And she immediately turned around, walked out of the back of the building, and she starts heat seeking me out from across the campus. And I was a good kid. Again, my parents were cops. I tried to stay out of trouble, but now inside I'm stressing out because the attendance lady is coming right at me. And as she gets close to me, I realize she has an envelope in her hand. And she hands me the envelope, and I'll never forget the words that she used. And she said, "I have a gift for you." And I never understood, there's no way I could have understood at that moment what those words and what this letter was going to mean to me. But I opened it up, and it was a letter from one of my classmates, a girl named Sarah. Now, Sarah didn't give me her last name or her last initial. So to this day, I'm still trying to find Sarah. But in that letter, Sarah went on to tell me that she'd been thinking about suicide. And she happened to show up at school on a day where, for the first time in her life, she heard someone else talking about mental health and talking about suicide. And as mortified as I was about my poem and what I had said, she thanked me for the pain that I shared, because she had convinced herself that people would be better off without her. And she said that maybe she'll think differently about that. She also thanked me for the hope that I had for other people, that even if we don't have all the answers, that we are willing to jump in the mud and be present with somebody in that pain. And she went on in that letter to tell me that that poem I'm so embarrassed about, she had gone and made copies of it and shared it with her friends, and that she posted it next to her bed, and she was going to read it every single morning to remind her of her reasons for living. And basically went on in that letter to say that I helped her save her own life. Now, I share this story with you because suicide prevention, mental health, all of the topics that we've been talking about that we're going to cover tonight can be overwhelming. They can be frightening. They can scare us. They can make us so worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing that we're frozen into not doing anything. And yet, as a 17-year-old boy with no training in mental health, no training in suicide prevention, just simply because I was willing to create space and say the S word and talk about mental health and talk about pain and hope, I was able to help somebody find their reasons for living. And so again, the reason why I share this story with you tonight is in the hopes that you never underestimate the role that you can have in helping someone find their reasons for living. Whether that's your child, whether that's your partner, whether that's some other family member, a colleague, whoever that is in your life, never underestimate the role that you can have. And I chose those words very carefully, helping someone find their reasons for living, because when I first got involved in suicide prevention, I used to think that it was my job to convince people not to die. That's what I thought. And I thought that my job was then to train people how to convince people not to die. But that's because I thought that when someone was thinking about suicide, they wanted to die. And what I've come to understand is that suicide is not about wanting to die. It's about not knowing how to go on living with the pain that they're experiencing. And therefore, suicide prevention is not about convincing. It's about helping someone find their reasons for living. And that, in my opinion, if you simplify suicide down to its two most basic factors, it's about pain and hope. And in that moment when you're talking to somebody, again, whether they're your spouse, your child, a friend, or a family member, It's not about erasing all the pain from their life. It's about trying to increase the hope just a little bit. Now, in your community over the past few years, even prior to the pandemic, there was so much stress and trauma that you as a community has experienced, and over the last year, even more so. And as we're creating these conversations, we have to acknowledge that we can't prevent pain from entering a person's life. But what we can do is help increase that hope, because we can go through an immense amount of pain if we have that hope. And sometimes we can't hold that hope ourselves, and we have to have someone hold that hope for us. So what I'm hoping tonight is that you're not only going to walk away a little bit more knowledgeable about the topics of mental health and suicide prevention, but really that you're going to walk away a little bit more comfortable to have a conversation, to know what to look out for, but then to follow up. And if you don't feel comfortable following up, that you'll know what resources you can reach out to. So with that, I'm going to pause. Brandon, could you just give me thumbs up? Can you see the slides? Are you hearing me okay? Everything's good? Okay, great. All right. Now, before we go any further, I want to stop and acknowledge where you all are at right now, as parents, as guardians of the children that you're looking out for, as grandparents, whatever. Over the past year, I think we have all spent time wishing that we would have handled the last 12 months better. You know, I thought at the beginning of the pandemic, I was going to learn yoga and learn how to bake a pie and learn all these crafts. And really just the reality is that we're here tonight. And survival is different in each of our lives. I had COVID back in the fall, and it was treacherous. It was awful. Some of you may have lost folks, but you're not just a parent who's struggling. You're a parent who's doing their best during extraordinary times. And we're hoping that we're going to give you more resources tonight. You probably also realize that parenting was never intended to be a 24/7 job, and all the value that schools have in our lives. And I just want to encourage you as we're going tonight to also acknowledge that most of you probably don't spend this much time, or maybe this is the first time ever that you've had a conversation about suicide prevention or mental health. So as we're done tonight, as we're wrapping up, I want to make sure we're giving you those resources, but also encouraging you to take a breath and to step away from this topic a little bit. Now, also, if what we talk about tonight motivates you to realize that, wow, there's somebody I'm really concerned about. Again, whether that's a family, a friend, or even your own child, then I hope that you'll be compelled to have that conversation and act. Now, with that, one of the most common questions I get when it comes to suicide is, what causes suicide? And so, although we don't have the full chat and live action going, I would just ask you to kind of say to yourself, what are some of the causes of suicide? And you might say mental illness or substance abuse. You might say neglect, abuse. You might say stress, anxiety, academic pressure. You might say bullying. And the reality is that there are a variety of reasons and causes and life situations and circumstances that can increase risk for suicide. But when we use that term cause, what we're saying is that if A, then B. And that's just simply not the case when it comes to suicide. And so, as a metaphor, an analogy, I want to use the board game Jenga. Now, if you're not familiar with the board game Jenga, you stack up some blocks and you take turns pulling out these blocks. And eventually someone will pull out the block that causes the whole tower to fall, right? We say, well, that person lost because that one block caused the tower to fall. Now, we all know that's not the case, right? It wasn't that one block. That one block was just the straw that broke the camel's back. But the structure, the infrastructure, and the sturdiness of that tower had been weakened by all the other pieces that had been pulled out. And if we relate this back to suicide or mental health, it's never that one block. We often say that last block was the cause. But again, that last block, whether it's a breakup or the bullying or the stress from social isolation, is really just the straw that broke the camel's back. And again, we can't prevent bad things from happening in a young person's life as much as we wish we could shelter them. What we can do, though, is to be vigilant, to pay attention, to notice the warning signs and recognize those risk factors so that we can reinforce that structure, so that we can make them more resilient and more sturdy. Because as we all know, the longer you live, the more blocks are going to get pulled out. And it's about just reinforcing and sturdying yourself for the next event. And I mention all of this. This is important. I do a lot of work in what we call messaging around suicide prevention. And to start down that path a little bit, first I want to just share with you some of the recommended terminology when we're talking about suicide. Now, there's been a few studies that show that this is a preferred language from suicide loss survivors and attempt survivors, but I want to give you a little bit more reasoning behind it. Now, the most common phrase that we use when someone has died by suicide is that that person committed suicide, right? Now, again, just say this to yourself or type it in the chat, whatever. What are some of the other actions that we commit? We commit crime, we commit sin, we commit treason, adultery, perjury, arson, felonies, all these negative things. And so that term committed automatically brings with it a negative connotation of an association with crime or sin. A lot of people are shocked to find out that it used to actually be illegal to attempt suicide. A lot of faith institutions are starting to change the way that they frame suicide because they classified suicide as a sin because they were trying to prevent people from doing it. But by classifying suicide as a sin or the equivalent of in that faith, what they've come to realize is that they weren't preventing people from dying by suicide. They were preventing people from talking about it. So we want to get rid of that stigma, that bias, that shame that comes with the term committed suicide. And instead, we want to use terminology like died by suicide, died of suicide, or took their own life. It's still very clear what happened, but again, it takes that bias away from it. Now, you're also going to hear people refer to a successful versus an unsuccessful suicide attempt. Now, again, if you break that down, a successful attempt means the person is dead, and an unsuccessful attempt means the person is alive. So success really has nothing to do with it. And so these acts or these incidents should be referred to simply as a death by suicide or an attempted suicide. And I know that it may feel like splitting hairs when we talk about appropriate terminology, but what, again, this does is help to change people's minds and attitudes around the topic. And this is important, as I mentioned, because there is something we know as safe and effective messaging for suicide prevention. Now, talking about suicide does not cause it to happen, especially when talking to an individual that you're concerned about. But how we message as a community or as news or entertainment media about suicide can impact people greatly. And there's something known as the Virtue effect, which basically says that when we have negative messages, we will have negative outcomes. Those negative messages that try to portray suicide as skyrocketing or epidemic, that try to normalize suicide as something that happens all the time, may inadvertently increase that danger or remove a protective factor for somebody who's vulnerable and already having thoughts of suicide. But on the other end, this is where I want you to focus your energy, is what's known as the Papageno effect. And the Papageno effect basically says when we have positive messages, when we focus on hope, when we focus on prevention, when we teach people not only what to look out for or what to do, we can see positive outcomes such as increased help seeking, increased referrals, and increased connection. And you can go to suicidepreventionmessaging.org, but I wanted to share this with you tonight because we as adults, we have a responsibility to our youth to make sure that the messages that we're putting out there about suicide and suicide prevention are doing no harm. We need to make sure that we're educating our youth about what to do, and also that suicide can be prevented. Now, does that mean suicide can always be prevented? Is it 100% preventable? That's a tough thing for me to swallow because that, how do I write that? But what we know is that in many instances, in most instances, that the person who's thinking about suicide, again, doesn't want to die. They just don't know how to go on living. And we need to identify it. We need to connect them to the appropriate help. So as we're messaging about suicide, we want to make sure we're sharing resources and those other items that I talked about. Now, I'm going to share this resource again with you later. We're going to spend some time covering, the education pieces. But later, if you want to go in and follow up and learn more about the topic of suicide, you can go to suicidespreventable.org or the Spanish language el suicidio es prevenible.org to learn more about warning signs, how to have a conversation, and some other resources. Now, I want to share just one statistic with you tonight. And with that, I don't do this to scare you, but I share this with you in the hope that it will paint a broader picture. When we have any single individual, whether they are a youth, an adult, an older adult, when they die by suicide, that is an absolute tragedy. And we hear a lot in the news media about the number of suicides. But the bigger picture, the bigger thing that I want us to be concerned about is the travesty of how many youth are struggling with so much emotional pain that they think about suicide. So on the screen, you see that about 17% of youth, and this is California data, reported that they had thought about suicide in the previous 12 months. that 13% had actually gone so far as to make a plan about suicide, and that 3% of youth had attempted suicide, or 7% of youth had attempted suicide. And the data goes on from there. But really what we're looking at is over the 20 years that I've been working in this field, unfortunately, those numbers haven't changed. About 1 in 5 youth over the past 12 months has thought about it, and about 1 in 10 youth have attempted suicide. And in my opinion, that's where we really need to be focusing our energy. We shouldn't allow for so many youth to be in that much pain. And that's why I'm working so closely with your school, and that we've committed to continue to build mental health support so that we can get these numbers down. The good news, though, is that over the past 20 years, the field of suicide prevention has grown exponentially. We have really good information on what we can do to prevent suicide. It starts with all of us being aware. As mentioned yesterday, even though the staff has been trained, it's a perishable skill. So I went back in and I met with the staff and I made sure that they were aware of what they should be vigilant for. We're making plans to make sure that we're going to be educating the students, because as much as we as adults want to think that we have the finger on the pulse of our kids, we're only ever going to see part of the picture. So we have to prepare our kids. And also tonight, this is a community effort. As a community, you as parents, as well as every adult who comes into contact with a child, needs to be aware of what to look for. What are the signs of distress that means a child is struggling with their mental wellness, or that they might be thinking about suicide? So it starts with just being aware. Number 2, we all have to be comfortable with that conversation and asking somebody, are you thinking about suicide? So that we know how to respond. The only way that we will ever know if someone is thinking about suicide is if we ask that question. So we're going to spend a bit of time on that. Again, reinforcing this idea that talking to someone does not cause suicide. Again, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've literally talked to tens of thousands of kids about suicide and had to ask them, are you thinking about this? And never once did I have a kid get mad at me. Never once was a kid upset because I cared about them. Typically what I see is their shoulders relax and it's like a pressure valve has been released. So we need to be comfortable with that step. And if we're not comfortable, we need to know who to connect them to so that someone can ask them that question. Once we know a child is thinking about suicide, we need to sit down and do something called a safety plan that I'll explain with you later. We also need to make sure they're in a safe environment. What can we do to limit access to lethal means in our homes to make sure that they're staying safe? From there, we need to connect them with a mental health professional, but not just any mental health professional. Think about it this way. If you broke your foot, you wouldn't want to go see an ear, nose, and throat doctor, right? You would want to go see a podiatrist, somebody who specializes in feet. Same with finding a mental health professional. If you're looking for a mental health professional to treat and support someone who's having thoughts of suicide, there are 4 treatments that have been shown to be most effective. And those treatments are therapeutic. That has nothing to do even with medication. So we want to find somebody who's properly trained and specializes in this. And one of the things I'm working with schools across the state, but especially with your district, is we need to figure out how to respond to youth in the least restrictive way. How can we support them without further traumatizing them? Now, to take a step back from suicide for just a moment and suicide prevention, let's just talk about mental health. We had the opportunity, and I've had a number of opportunities over the last 12 months to talk to kids and see where they were at. And one of the things they're asking for is those connections. Now, a lot of connections have been limited over the last year, but there's still ways and healthy ways for youth to stay connected. As we come back to this new world and we're starting to open it up, encouraging those other connections with healthy adults, with other youth, is going to be really important. As a parent, I think back to when I was a kid, and there were absolutely conversations I would not have felt comfortable with my parents, but I would have talked to a coach or a teacher, an aunt or an uncle. We also want to help promote those healthy emotion skills, not just in the home, and we're going to do that in the school setting. We're going to work and build up our youth vocabulary about emotions and about mental health. But to be honest with you, when a parent comes to me and says their child is struggling, one of the first things I tell them to do is to focus on the small things. For example, what are the 3 most basic things we're told to stay healthy? To eat right, to exercise, and get a good amount of sleep. What are the first 3 things we stop doing, even as adults, when we're stressed out? We stop eating right, we stop exercising, we stop getting a good amount of sleep. So sometimes it's getting back to the basics first. For me, sleep. Sleep is the one thing I'm always good at. So when I'm off track or I'm imbalanced, I focus on sleep for a few days. I get some rest. Now I'm ready to exercise. Once I start exercising, I'm ready to start eating healthy. Sometimes it's about the basic things. Now, how do you create safe space for your children? There's a friend of mine who lost his son to suicide a couple years ago. And as he talks about the loss of his son, one of the things he says that he got really angry about after he lost his son is that his son never told him that he was feeling sad. His son never told him that he was struggling with depression. And he said, why would my son do that? Why didn't my son let me know that he was having a hard time? He said after he took time to reflect, he realized that, well, what was I showing my son? I was showing my son that I had to be the man of the house, and that whether I was angry or anxious or depressed, frustrated, I always tried to stay right in the middle and be very stoic. And he said, so what did that teach my son? That taught my son to put a lid on it, stuff it down, and just be in the middle, stay stoic. And so sometimes we get scared to show our emotions to you. But I would encourage you, as appropriate, to consider opening up. When you ask your kid, how was your day? And they say, oh, I was fine. And they ask you, how was your day? And you just say, I was fine too. Let them know, hey, I'm really frustrated. This person at work was really frustrating, hard to work with. Or I'm really sad, or I'm just anxious and I don't know why. But most importantly, just being emotionally present. Also, being familiar with the resources. We're going to share tonight resources with you available to you in the community, as well as those available through the school site. And as you are supporting a loved one, especially a child, through their mental health struggles, through thoughts of suicide, it can really take a toll on yourself. And I really want to encourage you to find your own support system. Find another parent who's been through something similar, or a friend who is a good listener, so that you can continue to reinforce your structure as well. We also have to be patient. We know that mental health doesn't just evaporate overnight, but it also doesn't come back. That wellness doesn't come back immediately. So we have to be patient with ourselves and really encourage patience with your child. One of the things I also like to remind youth of is that they kind of feel if they go through a struggle, especially a mental health challenge at a young age, that they're going to be this fragile piece of glass that's broken forever. And what I try to encourage them to understand is that by them facing some challenges at this age, they are going to be so much stronger and resilient when they get into the college age years and when they get into their young adulthood, because they will have already dealt with some struggles. And I'm an EMT, so I understand this isn't medically accurate, but we always say that a bone heals back stronger. And to try to keep that focus for them on the strength and resiliency and the life skills that they're going to walk away with. But when do you need to worry? One of the toughest parts is that mood changes and fluctuations are just part of the childhood, the teenage experience. So how do we know what's normal versus what is different? And what we really want to look for is when those new behaviors stick around for a while, when those new behaviors seem to be something unhealthy or something dangerous. But we have to stay vigilant. We have to stay present. A lot of times parents will ask me, well, when is the best time for me to talk to my kid about mental health and suicide prevention? Do I wait till they see the warning signs? Do I wait for them to come to me? And what I encourage every parent or every adult who has a child in their lives is to start the conversation early. And the best time to start a conversation about mental health is when you're really not at all worried that mental health is an issue. And start to set the table and start to build that comfort around these topics. But we need to remain constantly vigilant. Now, also the recent circumstances with the pandemic have also fluctuated how our youth typically act. I think by now, a year later, we're starting to see a kind of a new normal in their behaviors. What is a normal level of isolation or separation? So again, it's where are they at right now? But some questions to ask yourself. Maybe at the beginning of all this, your child started diving into music more because they had some more free time. Maybe they were being more crafty or finding new interests. Have they started to lose those interests? Have they started to disconnect from their friends? One of the things we really want to be aware of is when we see those emotions change very quickly from high to low, from left to right, whatever that is. Now, we often associate easily sadness or what we often call depression, even though it's not clinically depression. But we associate sadness with mental health struggles, right? What we don't always associate with mental health struggles is anger and aggression or risky behaviors. Now, I know when I was a young boy, I wasn't taught very well about how to deal with emotions. I was taught that if you're, as a boy, the only emotion you're allowed to feel is happiness or anger. You're not allowed to feel sad. You're not allowed to cry. And so the only time that I could express my emotions was to turn to anger. And unfortunately, when somebody is sad, our instinct is to pull them close. When somebody is acting angry, however, our instinct is to pull them away or push them away. And so I would encourage you just to take a moment, whatever that change in behavior is, but especially if there's anger or something going on, to take a step back. And the most important question you can ask is why? Why is this behavior different? What is going on? Now, as we're moving forward, that giving away belongings, what we're really starting to build to now is specifically critical warning signs around suicide. So these are what we refer to as the big three. If someone is talking openly, directly about suicide or wanting to die, not wanting to be alive might be what it sounds like at younger ages, that's when we definitely need to have a conversation about suicide. When someone starts to do what we call preparatory behaviors, so that's giving away possessions, writing out a will, searching online for how to, or seeking out means and methods, trying to get access to ways or means that they could use in a suicide attempt, that's a especially critical warning sign. But most importantly, again, going back to the beginning, is we're looking for hopelessness. And hopelessness looks different in every single person out there, but it's something that we can feel, it's something that we can sense. And the most important thing I can tell you about what to look for is to trust your instincts. You may not be an expert in suicide prevention, but you are all experts in people. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And on the screen, and this is a screen capture from that suicideispreventable.org, again, where you can go to learn more. But what you see is those changes in behavior, the changes in sleep, neglect of appearance. Again, what we're looking for is anything that's out of the normal, especially when it's been out of the normal for days or weeks. We want to be especially vigilant. But the only way we'll never, ever know for certain if someone is thinking about suicide is simply asking the question, are you thinking about suicide? So again, if you think something's wrong, don't delay. Don't put this off till next week or next month. If anything that I'm talking about right now is raising concern for you, please have a conversation right away. And be courageous and have that conversation. A lot of times we're scared to ask people if they're thinking about suicide because we're so worried, especially with youth, that we're gonna put the idea in their head. I can almost guarantee you that any one of your children at the high school level understand what the word suicide is and what that concept means, but they may not understand all the ramifications that come with it. But asking that question is hugely important. Every best practice, every research expert, every clinician will tell you that the number one thing we can do is to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? Now you can lead up to the conversation by creating space and saying, hey, I noticed you've been acting differently. I'm worried about you. I love you. I care about you. But sometimes when people are going through what you went through and acting like you've been asking, they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? So I know this is going to sound really awkward and a little bit frightening to some of you, but as you're sitting there in that room, wherever you're at right now, and if you're not in a space where you can, please promise that when you're in the car tomorrow or in the shower or whatever, that you'll practice saying this question. But I want you just right now to literally practice saying this question, just to get these words off your lip. Are you thinking about suicide? It's one of the most powerful and one of the most frightening questions you'll ever have to ask, especially of a child. But it's the only way that we can ever get them the support that we need or that they need. As you're jumping into this conversation, just a few tips. Number one is make sure you're in a good headspace. You know, the same way that my mom would yell at me and say, let me get 2 feet inside the door before you ask me any questions. Make sure that you're approaching them at a time that's good for them. If they're cramming for the test, they're stressed out about something else, maybe that's not the best time. Create a safe environment. I know that me and my parents always had our deepest conversations when we were going on a hike or doing a project, something to keep my hands busy or my body busy to let the conversation flow naturally. Now, again, that healing takes time, so be patient. You may be worried about your kid, you take them for a hike, and maybe you only get 5 minutes out of them that's focused on mental health or how they're doing. That's still a win, because next time it'll be 10, the next time it'll be 20. And what you're doing is letting them know if they ever need to come to you, you're there. Again, being prepared with your resources, we're going to focus on those here in just a moment. And the most common concern that I get from parents is, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't have all the answers? And you don't have to have all the answers. In fact, you should listen more than you talk. There's a saying that goes, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. It's not about fixing the problem. It's not about having all the answers. In fact, if you get a question, I don't know, is a perfectly acceptable response. It's about jumping in the mud and being there in that space and holding their hand and holding on to the hope until they can feel it themselves. All right, so you've asked your child, are you thinking about suicide? What if they say no? This is actually a really big concern of parents. What if they say no? That's obviously the actual best case scenario. But what you've done is you've let them know, hey, well, if you ever do have thoughts of suicide, you can come to me. I'm not scared to talk about suicide. I love you enough to jump into that awkward conversation and talk to you about it. At the same time, though, there was still something that concerned you, right? So you still want to focus on that coping strategies, on that resiliency, giving them some of those resources and letting them know, hey, here's the National Lifeline, here's the crisis text line. I want you to know you are always welcome to reach out to get support wherever you need it. And just to listen, again, listen without judgment. Try to avoid those cliches of time heals all wounds and there's plenty of fish in the sea. I hear that from kids a lot. Same way that, first time I got dumped, I remember putting my head in my mom's lap while I cried and she petted my head and said, there's plenty of fish in the sea, time heals all wounds. But what it felt like she was saying is, you're just a kid. What do you possibly have to be worried about? Now, what if they say yes? One of the most important things you can do is remain calm, but also take it seriously. I hear a lot from youth that they are concerned that when they talk to their parents about mental health, that they're not heard, that we don't justify the experience that they're having. So to take it seriously, one of the things you can also do is to thank them. Say, wow, thank you so much for telling me. I would never have had the courage to say something like that to my parents. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for trusting me. We're going to get through this together. Encourage them to keep talking. You're going to get a lot more if they tell you a story than if you try to play 20 questions with suicide. Allow them to just tell you a story. And one of the kind of simple steps I would recommend to tell you is, imagine your child came to you and told you that they had a stomach ache. What kind of questions, and go ahead and type this in the chat. That would be awesome. So let's do this. We're going to role play, type it in the chat for those of you who have access to your keyboard. Let's pretend I'm your child. I come to you and I say I have a stomach ache. What kind of questions would you ask me about the pain in my stomach? And again, this is the interactive part. Hoping I'm going to see in the chat some of the questions that you'd be asking. So again, the question is, what are some of the questions you would ask your child if they came to you with pain in their stomach? So you might ask them, well, what do you think might have caused this pain? You might ask them, what does it feel like? Describe the pain to me. Definitely parents here tonight. So do you need to go to the bathroom? So I'm going to translate that for our purposes right now to, is there anything that relieves the pain? Anything that makes the pain lighter? Have you experienced this pain before? Scale of 1 to 10. Thank you for all your engagement. Scale of 1 to 10. How bad does it hurt? Wonderful. What makes it worse? What makes it better? So with that, let's do this now. So let's say that a child comes to me and says that we're having a conversation. They tell me they're thinking about suicide. So I've asked them. They say yes. As I'm listening to their story, what I might say to them is, wow, I had no idea you were in this much pain. How long have you been feeling this way? When did this pain start? What does it feel like when you're having those thoughts? Okay, scale of 1 to 10. How bad is it right now? It's at a 7. Okay, has it ever been a 10? Okay, a couple days ago. I know. I'm so sorry that you felt that bad. What happened to make that pain feel like a 10? You were online and you saw your ex with somebody else. You were stressed about the future, what you wanted. Okay. Well, something happened to bring that pain down from a 10 to a 7? What made the pain a little bit better for you? You talked to one of your friends, contacted the crisis text line, you went for a walk. Okay. And what we're doing now is we're starting to understand what is the real problem. Because suicide is not the problem for people who are thinking about suicide. People who are thinking about suicide miscorrectly try to understand suicide as a solution to their problems, which we know is not the case. But the real problem is the pain. So by understanding the pain, feeling what that pain is, we start to understand what this person's experience is. What we've also begun to do is that we've started to help them understand that they to some degree can control this pain, that they can start to see what led to the pain getting better. They can understand what helped them reduce the pain. And so that's been shown to be really valuable in the students that I talk to. Now, once you have a child who's thinking about suicide, I would really encourage you, as one of your follow-up steps, to reach back out to your school. A lot of parents get concerned because they don't understand that any mental health records on your student are kept completely separate from the academic records. So when your child goes off to college or goes into a workforce or goes into the military, it's totally separate, totally different record kept. And they can also offer a ton of supports, which the school is going to come back in a few minutes and talk to you about. But you need to connect them to a mental health professional. Now, in the meantime, in that moment, one of the things I would recommend you do, you see that number, and you're going to see it a few more times, is 1-800-273-8255. That is the number to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Now, hopefully you're aware of it, but if you're not, we hear that term crisis line or lifeline, and we understand, or we think that we understand, that there is a threshold of crisis that you need to pass before you can contact them. But that number is not like 911. There's not a level of emergency you have to reach before you contact them. If you just talked to your child and they told you that they're thinking about suicide and you don't know what to do next, you don't know how to make the environment safer, you don't know what else to say to your child, you can call them. You could do a 3-way call with your child and have them talk you and your child through next steps. If you're preparing to talk to your child and you need a little bit of coaching up, you need a little bit of a pep talk, you can call them. If you are overwhelmed tonight after this presentation and you need somebody to talk to, if you lose somebody or lost somebody to suicide and you need an ear, any of those reasons is perfectly acceptable and encouraged for you to call the hotline. But ultimately, you need to have your child evaluated by a mental health professional. Now, your school can start that process, or you can connect with somebody. But again, you want to make sure you're connecting with somebody who's been properly trained, who knows what they're doing when it comes to suicide prevention. And don't be afraid to ask them, have you ever had training on suicide prevention? Have you ever had training on how to provide ongoing care to somebody who's having thoughts? And another thing I want to share with you that you can do in the moment is called a safety plan. Now, again, your school can help you with this, a mental health professional, but you can start to build this. And basically, a safety plan is exactly what it sounds like. A plan for ourselves to keep ourselves safe. And so it asks somebody, what are some of your coping skills? What are some of your distractions? What are some of your triggers or your warning signs? And there's an app you can download for free, my3app.org. You can go to the website. It's available through iPhone or Android, and your child downloads it and they can email you a copy of it. But what that does is it gives them a safety plan, something to help keep them safe right in their phone. And one of the ways I describe it is that it's like teaching somebody to swim against a rip current rather than hoping that there's going to be a lifeguard there to save them. So it helps them to build their own resources, but then also helps them understand when they need to reach out for help. Now, again, as I mentioned, the National Lifeline is there 24/7. I'm going to share some other resources here with you right now, actually. So the National Lifeline, so if you're there at home, we will be sharing the PowerPoint. This will be recorded, but if you want to take a picture, or even better yet, go ahead and create a new contact in your phone and share it with everybody in your family. So the National Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. By calling that number, you're automatically going to be routed back to your local crisis center. You can also get a chat online by going to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Now, a separate organization that provides a very similar service, but one that is typically more approachable to youth, is the Crisis Text Line. Same deal, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can text hello, pretty much text anything to 741-741, and you will be connected with a trained crisis counselor, again, that can help support you helping somebody else, or if you yourself are in crisis. Another wonderful resource I would really encourage you to share with your youth is called Teen Line. So Teen Line is available from 6 to 10 p.m. every night. The text services are available 6 to 9 p.m. every night, but it is a support line that is staffed by other teenagers. There's a group of teenagers down in Los Angeles. This organization has been around for 40 plus years. And what they do is they go through about 100 hours of training, and they are actually the call takers on the line. They're being supervised by mental health professionals, but when a child or a teenager calls that number, the person on the other end of the phone is also a teenager. They have teenagers contact them about breakups, about stress, about academic pressure, about family issues, and also about suicide. They are connected to the D.D. Hirsch Crisis Center. If a teenager calls the line outside of the hours of 6 to 10, that call will automatically be routed to that local crisis center. So it's never a bad number to call, but 6 to 10 is when they're going to reach those other youth. Now, as we're wrapping up and getting to the conversation, I see a lot of questions coming through. We want to make sure we leave plenty of time. Again, that film that I showed you at the beginning is from the Directing Change program. We've been doing this for about 9 years. Over that time, we've received about 5,000 films from youth from across the state. Every year we get amazing films from House of Blue over at Pleasant Valley High School. We're going to be implementing the program at Chico next year. So if your child has a passion for mental health, for suicide prevention, if they got a passion for filmmaking, if they have one or the other, we'll train them up on whatever they need to grow at. But it's a really powerful way to engage youth. And I hear amazing stories from youth every year. You know, even youth who participated as a freshman in high school and now they're a freshman in college. And they say, I thought back to the warning signs I learned and I felt confident to intervene and I knew what resources to ask. We also have a number of educational resources. The training that I met your district team at came to one of my trainings up there in partnership with the Butte County Office of Education. But any of you who are educators out there as well, we have lesson plans, we have short videos. And again, those films that are created by youth, it's also a great opportunity for you to start a conversation with your kid. You know, tonight after this, use this presentation as an excuse to start setting the table for your child. One more time, that resource I shared is suicideispreventable.org, or else suicidio.org, where you can go to review some of the content, the warning signs, the risk factors, and the pieces we talked about. Now here's my email. Again, that is the website for directingchangeca.org. I do want to caution you, that is my email address. It's an email address. I am not a crisis counselor. If you or your child are in distress or in crisis, please contact the National Lifeline. Please contact the crisis text line or your school. But if you're interested in learning about the program, learning more about the trainings, I'd be more than happy to speak with you. But again, I'm not a crisis counselor. If you are in crisis, please reach out to one of the resources I mentioned previously. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to ask my colleagues, my friends, and my teammates to hop on here with me and help me guide through the chat and see if there's any questions that have come up. I'm going to take a breath, have some water, and look through some of the chat myself. But team, family, how's everybody doing out there?
Hey, you're a rock star, Stan. I mean, the amount of information you're able to put and the way you place it. Brandon, I'm wondering if do we want to go to Ms. Trowbridge to have her facilitate kind of what resources we have in our district, or would you like to go to answering some of the questions because you're viewing the chat room?
Yeah, we've had some questions in there. Yeah, let's go to Damie and talk about some within our district and what we're doing. So Damie, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Brandon and Doug and Stan and everyone for joining us tonight. So my name is Damie Trowbridge. I'm a program coordinator for Chico Unified, and I want to briefly share with you some of the mental health supports and resources that we have on campus available to all of your students. Chico High, as well as every campus within Chico Unified, is assigned staff available to students on a daily basis to provide direct support or assist in connecting students and families with agency resources. So first, we have 5 school counselors who are each assigned to one of your students by last name. Your school counselor acts as a liaison between yourselves, their teachers, and connecting you with outside resources. Your school counselor is an educational and vocational resource, but is also there for social, emotional, and personal support for your student. Parents can learn more about the counseling staff by going to the counseling link on the Chico High School's website. Parents can also call and schedule an appointment at any time to meet with their child's school counselor to learn about resources and supports. Chico High School and Pleasant Valley High School also have a wellness counselor split between the 2 schools, which starting next year will be 1 full-time wellness counselor at each site. Diana LeBlanc works with students individually, in groups, and connects students to outside resources. She also creates a monthly wellness newsletter with many great mental health resources on it. You can view the current and previous monthly newsletters and learn more information about our wellness counselors by going to the Chico High School website counseling page, then clicking on parent-student resources and then health and wellness resources. There is also a targeted case manager at Chico High School. Targeted case managers, or TCMs as they are often referred to, work with parents both at school and in the home environment to assist with school problems, which can be academic, behavior, health, or attendance, and family concerns whenever they can be of assistance. There are also 2 school psychologists at Chico High, one who is full-time and the other who splits her time between Chico High and PV High. School psychologists perform psychoeducational assessments to determine appropriate programs and instructional processes, and they also assist students in understanding and seeking solutions to social, emotional, or academic problems and issues. Also, on the Chico High School website, there is a link for anonymous reporting of any type of concern, need, or question. We monitor this information 24/7 and have had instances where we were able to reach out and provide support to students, families, or staff that have reported concerns. The link is on the front page of the website that says anonymous reporting. And lastly, Chico Unified has partnered with Care Solace, which is a mental health connection service. And this program helps to connect families, students, and staff to counseling services that range from no cost to insurance accessible. The school counselors and other site staff can help families access the program. And families can also access the program themselves, again, by going to the Chico High School website counseling page, then clicking on Parent Student Resources, and then Health and Wellness Resources. Again, thank you so much, Dan, for all that you have done for us and for joining us tonight, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Damie. And I also, I was trying to cue it up, but I didn't want to throw you off, but I was going to do this and walk folks through. Is everybody seeing the home page right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So what Ms. Trowbridge was talking about, this is our home page. So I just wanted to, walk folks through where they can find those things. So homepage, from the homepage, hover over the counseling tab, mental health services. We click on that, takes you right to mental health services page within the counseling, and you click right on the resources, and you're right into all those resources that Damie was talking about. Also, as simple as you getting in contact with a counselor, with any one of them, you click on that. I just click on that counseling tab. It takes me to the home page of the counseling. There's the counselors right there. There's their alphabet breakdown, but I'd like to also make a point, and I try and make a point to this as well. It does not have to be if their counselor. It could be any one of those. The very first one, Miss McMahon, because she's the top. You click on that, and it will take you directly to an email page where you can communicate any needs that you have directly with a counselor. Right below that, this is Miss Wisdom is our counseling secretary. Mr. Amati, one of our school psychologists, and Miss Hervey, who is a panelist on here, our other school psychologist. Again, that's taking it directly to them as well. So communication, quick and easy. Going back to the homepage, another form of communication, you need to bring to our attention as a school. Right on this homepage, this anonymous reporting through Catapult. So this is our emergency reporting system. This system is another form of communication, and this is a broadcast system. So you click on this, fill this out. You give as much information as possible. Obviously, the more information that we have, student name, the more we can act on it. Sometimes we do get anonymous. Some things are called for anonymous, but it makes it difficult. We're kind of handcuffed on how and who we can serve when it is really anonymous. But this is just another form that's available to parents to communicate. And like I said, when that broadcast, it goes to assistant principals, it goes to school psychologists, it goes to counselors, it goes also to district level folks as well. So, this is real emergency level stuff, but again, another form of communication available to parents. And as well, I wanted to show you where you can find myself, my personal email, Mr. Williams, any of the assistant principals, other front office. Hover over the About Us, administration, and just like on the counseling page, horrible picture of myself, if I might say so. But there's our emails right there for all three assistant principals, as well as Mr. Williams, our principal. So another form of a way to communicate with us. Did I miss anything there?
I'm sure there's always something that we'll miss. I think the important thing is what Mr. Collins said is that, I really appreciate everybody coming in, because we can't just operate as individual groups, struggling to form our own opinions and strategies about this. We all have to kind of work together. And I especially think that's vital in today's world, where we're not really seeing a lot of people modeling a community effort towards a positive energy. But for this type of effort, I think we all know that it's important to put away kind of our own individual feelings and try to work as a collective good. I also like what Mr. Collins said about with kids. It's really important for them to understand that what works for them may actually harm what works for their friend. And so it's really important for us to make sure we're going to continue to have kind of like a multi-tiered approach to this, with lots of different strategies and ways people can try to absorb and improve their lives, and that there isn't one way, but we're cultivating as many healthy ways as we can.
And I'm just looking at some of the questions. There's a few that have jumped out to me. Do you mind if I just go ahead and try to respond to some of those?
Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Right.
Stan.
Great. So one of the questions was about what type of resources are there for elementary school use. So the state law started by requiring schools in 7th and 12th grade. So basically middle schools and high schools have to do suicide prevention. That was expanded because what we've been telling for years is that the age group where we've been seeing suicide impact has gotten lower and lower. And so elementary schools are also required. So elementary schools are right now in the process of getting trained up, so that the same way that your high school teachers should be able to recognize warning signs and distress. And obviously it's going to look different at different ages, but also that they're prepared to do risk assessments. So as far as education on the topics for that age group, though, you're not obviously going to walk into a second grade classroom and talk about suicide. And so that's where we have what's called social emotional learning. And what we know is that social emotional learning, the younger we can begin to do that with youth, and it's done throughout the lifespan, but it starts at young ages, is that it increases protective factors like resiliency and help seeking and coping strategies, while also minimizing risk factors. In fact, there's a program called the Good Behavior Game. It's almost more of an activity. Kids they think they're participating in a game or an activity, not that they're participating in a program. But it's based around social emotional learning. And what we know is that over 20 years, they did a 20-year longitudinal study. And the kids who participated in that program 20 years later had reduced suicide attempts, reduced substance abuse issues, reduced self-harm. So the sooner we get to kids and start to help them understand this concept of mental health. A big problem is that we have always framed the issue of mental health for our kids around the issue of mental illness. And the same way that we all have physical health beyond our physical illnesses, we need to help our youth understand that language of having a bad day, that just because you're feeling anxious doesn't mean you have anxiety. And there's a difference between mental health challenges, and mental illness. So on the elementary age, we need to do more, and we need to create more programs, but there are a few things. Another question came up about ACEs. So ACEs, if you're not aware, refers to adverse childhood experiences. And the greater number of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, a child goes through in their formidable years, the data shows that they are more likely to be exposed to risky behaviors later in life. That can be suicide, that can be substance abuse. The reality, unfortunately, is that for many youth, what we've been experiencing over the pandemic is going to, can count as an adverse childhood experience. We know that ACEs can increase those, but every one of us is different. How each of us reacts to an event in our lives is going to be dependent on where we are at in our lives, what coping skills we have been passed down, what mental health life skills we've been passed down. And I also want to take a moment to talk about this. Going back to that idea of messaging that I spoke to earlier, I want you to be very cautious, or I encourage you to be very cautious in how you are messaging about the relation from COVID to suicide. I saw a few comments that talked about the data that I shared was pre-COVID. I would just encourage you to be careful. The same way that when we talked about bullycide back in the early 2000s, what happened was we saw an increase in kids who were getting bullied who were attempting suicide. Because what we inadvertently did was we normalized suicide as a response to bullying. And so I'm not saying that we don't have conversations we as a community need to have, but we have to be cautious about who is our audience. And when we're putting out, for example, one of the most dangerous statements that's out there is people will say that LGBTQ youth, or youth who identify as LGBTQ, are 3 to 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. Now that data may show that LGBTQ youth identify more highly with thoughts of suicide, but we don't ever want to tell somebody that because of one part of who they are, or because of one thing they've been through, that they might be more at risk for suicide. So again, I say all of that. It doesn't have to do with whatever nugget you're speaking to, but when we're messaging about suicide to youth, we have to be very cautious in the messages that we're putting out, because we might inadvertently remove a protective factor. So as far as ACEs, going back to that Jenga block, right? It's never just one thing. So we need to be cautious in our messaging. Another question, I'm sorry, there was another one that was kind of specific, and I don't want to call out the individual by name. So I'm just going to talk about a certain situation of a child who had done some researching online, and then there was some, and Damie or Patience, I don't know if you can better summarize for me so I can be as respectful as I can of the individual who's asking this. But basically, what I understand is their child was searching online. It got flagged. They had a conversation. Oh, we were just joking around. A little bit later, there was an email to a friend that again got flagged, where the child was asking for help. The question, I think, is you're connecting your child to a professional. Is there anything else that you can do? Number one is exactly what we talked about, which is create space to debrief. Even if your child sees a professional 5 times a week, that's only 5 hours of a week. There's a lot of other hours within that week that you need to create space. I would sit down and do a safety plan that we talked about. You can go to my3app.org. Even at a young age, a child is able to help you build a safety plan around that. Help to identify their triggers, their coping strategies, their distractions. I would also make sure that the professional that you're connecting them to, especially if there's thoughts of suicide, is trained in suicide prevention like we discussed. But the most important thing you can do is create space to listen to your child and have a conversation. And the most important thing, actually, that we don't do enough for children when they're struggling with mental health is to ask them, what do you need? What do you think will help keep you safe? What can I do to support you? We oftentimes impose what we think we would need, but we don't spend enough time asking them and then continue to check in. So I hope that provides some guidance. I would also encourage you to connect with your school staff and district and talk to them about it. Let's see, what other questions do we have? One question is about the difference between, it sounds like there's a difference as far as motivation for someone talking about suicide. And I get this from parents a lot, like, aren't they just manipulating us? You know, this kid is used, you know, kind of this boy who cried wolf mentality. And what I say is that unfortunately, we have to take it seriously every single time. But when I'm working with a child who is constantly reverting back to suicide to get attention or to get something that they want or need, the fact that they have to go to those lengths to speak, to get attention is very dangerous and very frightening to me. The bottom line is at that moment that we need to give them attention, and then we can work with them on the back end to help them understand that there are other ways for them to get our attention. There's no exact formula to know, is this a fake cry for help? Is this, is this real? Unless we have that conversation, the more we create space for these conversations, the better we'll be able to sift through it, and also the more we'll be able to trust the youth of that. Any other questions you want me to cover?
Patience, did you want to mention that?
Yeah.
That you put in?
Can I screen share?
Yes.
Or can you screen share it?
I don't have it up, but you give it a second. You should be good.
Okay.
Oh, one thing that, thank you for the individual out there who reminded us. I don't think we've mentioned this today, and a lot of you may not be aware. Those resources that I shared are on the back of your students' ID cards. The National Lifeline, the crisis text line, so they have those. What I would encourage you to do, though, is to take those numbers and put them into your child's phone.
So I just wanted to share that the North Valley Community Foundation is promoting a youth suicide mental health summit that they're going to be doing Thursday, April 22nd. And I think Stan, I know that we had talked about this with you as well, but it's 8 to 3 p.m. The students will be excused from school if they want to choose to attend that day. And this flyer should be going home to parents via our Peach Jar app. And so please keep your eyes out and look for that. Again, it's a youth mental health summit. There's going to be keynote speakers. There's going to be small group discussions. And if you want more information, you can go to the northvalleycommunityfoundation.org/youth summit to find more information about that. And it will go through our Peach Jar app as well to parents. And then I didn't know if Doug or Brandon want to talk about a little bit about Securely, because Stan was talking about how our emails are flagged and things get flagged. So I'm going to hand it off to one of you guys if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, before we go there real quick, Patience, if I can screen share, if you can stop sharing, I'll share another resource that I have pushed out or am getting ready to push out. Hopefully you all can see this, the Mind Out Loud.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, we're pushing this out to students. This is it's for the whole state of California, the 4th through the 6th, 3:30 to 5 p.m. That students can register, participate in mental wellness, mental health awareness for students. I'm pushing this out. Here at school, we have Google Classrooms. So each student, each grade level has their own Google Classroom where we push messages out to students. Obviously, our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, we're pushing that out. And then also going to send this out to students via Aries communication to their emails so that they have this if they would like to participate in this event as well. So going back to the question that Patience had talked about, and one of the comments in the chat kind of talked about this, is we do have our Securely software package that monitors our students' use on internet. So what they're Google searching, what they're researching, and it picks up on algorithms. This has also been talked about in board meetings as of recently as well. picks up on, the algorithms are set to pick up on certain words, indicators, and when they do highlight those topics that students are utilizing, referencing, it will send an alert email to our staff as well, our staff, so our school psychs, assistant principals, principal, counselors, and depending on what the levels that those algorithms determine, if there hasn't been a response, it will automatically send it to our SROs for response, or correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if it's directly to our SROs or if the level of threat determined by them is so great and it hasn't been responded to by us. I'm not sure if it's the SROs or directly to dispatch to potentially provide some sort of assistance to the house, make contact with the house, the parents, to ensure the safety of the student. There's also, did I get that wrong? If anybody wants to,
Brandon, if I could, I think you did a great job. I would just add that anytime you're dealing with software that's looking at algorithms, that if they're really tied to things that could be that are immediately obvious when you read them. And so that's kind of why we're trying to increase the amount of connectivity. I know there's questions in here. We're trying to try to create more open forums for kids to feel healthy talking in groups rather than just individually, because those algorithms work off of words, phrases, and key things, and they may get like an immediate crisis that at that moment. But if it's more subtle, if the communique is more subtle or the writing more complex, that's where it's going to require human beings to actually hear what's going on and kind of dwell a little deeper. So I think it works really, really well, but it does have its cracks.
All right, sorry, I've been furiously typing away and I realized I didn't mute my mic. So if you're hearing my typing going in the background, I apologize, team. Just looking for any other questions that might have come through.
There's some in the question and answer
I'm sorry, I missed those.
Portion.
Well, I can't speak to necessarily how your school is. I know we have plans in place and moving forward and what's been going on. But the first question about how is the school addressing? One of the hard realities about that is that, again, we can't always prevent. We want to keep our kids safe. That's one of the school's primary missions, is to keep kids safe. That being said, when we talk about bullying in the schools, bullying is simply, in my opinion, another term for harassment. And we have not yet erased that. We have bullying in the workplace. We just call it harassment. There's a lot of programs, a lot more training, a lot more emphasis on bullying prevention, and we want to try to stop it. But what my other hope would be is that we also make kids more resilient. How can we make kids more resilient to any of the struggles that they're facing, whatever that is? And that doesn't excuse bad behavior or mistreatment. One of the things that the research also shows us, though, is that the child who is doing the bullying is typically as, if not more likely, to be at risk of suicide than the victim of that bullying. And so it's a very tenuous situation. So again, we want to provide and protect our youth, but we also need to. It's not just about protecting them from bad things. It's also about making them more resilient to overcome and have the coping skills and knowing when to seek help. So the other question is, when someone has been impacted and had thoughts of suicide, should they be allowed to go to the memorial service of someone who's died by suicide? That's a really tough one, and I think that's an individual call. I think it depends on where they are at in their process. The story of my friend I shared with you earlier a few years ago, his brother died by suicide. So 2 suicides within a family, and I attribute it to the fact that in that family, we didn't really talk about it. We swept it under the rug and we hid it in the closet in the hopes that we would never have to discuss it again. So I think if a teenager has processed it, got into maybe some support groups, some counseling, some suicide bereavement, and they feel comfortable and capable, then that's their call. But if they haven't quite processed, if they're really still in the throes of their ideation, then I would probably recommend against it. Either way, though, I would want to check in with the teenager afterwards, not just that day, but continue to check in and make sure that they're processing it in a healthy way. I don't know if Damie or Patience, you would like to add or anything to that. And you don't have to. It's only if you disagree or agree, or either way.
I'll respond to one of the questions in the chat regarding the securely Autobot detection software, and the human element's not lost at all. It's just it flags it, and then we as a team reach out to that student, and that's when we're trying to make that human connection, and that's where we're trying to bring that human element that was outlined in the chat. Absolutely correct. We're not losing sight of that and trying to allow the software packages to do our job. So yeah, absolutely. We're trying to make those connections with those students.
All right, great. And I'm not seeing any other specific questions right now. One about the anonymous reporting. But again, if you have questions, again, about anything we talked about, please let us know. I'm here. I will also continue to hopefully have a relationship with your district. I'm going to be doing some work with Butte County Office of Education as well. So you don't have to get all this knowledge in one night. You've absorbed a lot. I threw a lot of content at you. And again, what I really hope that you'll do tonight is take a breath, take a step back. There may be some of you out there who are like, oh no, I need to do something tonight. But for many of you, you may just the thought of losing a child may have just overwhelmed you. And so you need to just take a breath, hug your kids, spend some space with them, watch a movie, or a show, whatever, and just be present with them. And that's good enough. But again, this topic is really heavy. You know how it's impacted me. It's impacted others, joining me tonight, and it's impacted many of you. So I really, this is not your one chance. We have a commitment that we are going to continue to talk about mental health, and as part of mental health, we will continue to talk about suicide prevention. We need to normalize conversations about these topics. And the other hope is that you will see from tonight is that this conversation tonight wasn't about suicide. It was about suicide prevention. The conversation wasn't about mental illness. It was about mental health. That really what we're trying to bring to youth is that you can jump into this space and have these conversations, and that they can be filled with hope. And we hope that, again, you're walking away tonight, not just hopefully more knowledgeable, but at the very least more comfortable with these topics and your own abilities to make a difference.
I'm gonna say thank you to everybody. Hopefully, as we continue to have more of these meetings and or presentations, you guys will join, and also, give us feedback on how we can improve it. The presentation was too long, or would have been better to have more of a Q&A. Like any feedback to myself or Mr. Kessler, anybody on the panel that you feel comfortable emailing, please do, so we can improve how we're presenting this to you, and also how we're getting feedback. I would appreciate it. I want to thank our panel members. I know you guys have been doing a lot of hours at this, and it can be overwhelming, but your professionalism is so respected by me, and I'm sure by lots in this chat. And I wish everybody a really good evening. Thank you, Brandon, for setting it up. Thank you, Patience and Damie, for joining us. And of course, Stan, we couldn't do it without your expertise. I appreciate it.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And if there's any questions for those that are still on that didn't get addressed, please feel free to, like Mr. Williams said, reach out to me and reach out to any one of us. Phone call, email, anything you need. We are here.
Yeah. Yes, good idea.
Yes, Stan.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you again for the invitation tonight. Everybody out there, thank you. It's nice to meet you all. Hopefully one day we'll be able to meet in person at a mental health event or suicide prevention event we're doing for our kiddos, because we're going to be doing a lot of that in the future. So again, just take care, everybody. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
You.